Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined, where we think big about veterinary life and career, which is exactly what we do in this episode on a whole new level. My guest is Dr. Aletha Carson, who is the Senior Manager of Data and Clinical Studies with Mars Petcare and is on the forefront of all things technology in the field of veterinary medicine. With a good mentor who explained that a veterinary career is ever evolving and a spirit that thrives with all things new, this equine veterinarian found a fascinating spot on the IT team. She brings an important perspective to the growth of technology, and we talk about the good and the bad, the warnings, and the exciting things about technology in vet med. She is an active part of the Mars Pet Insight project, and her diverse career is a great example of all the places that we can go in veterinary medicine. We start with her earlier equine focus with a very interesting story that will make you greatly appreciate equine veterinarians. And when she talks about North Carolina, it's because her bio is wrong on the company website. Oops. She is an Oregon girl. So let's start Dr. Carson's adventurous career. Thank you so much for being willing to sit down, talk a little bit about your really unique career journey, but also all the different technology that you've witnessed and are a part of in the veterinary and pet world. What even got you interested in veterinary medicine in the first place?
You know what? I think it's that classic story that so many of us have, and that was like I was a kid that was always going to be a veterinarian. I mean, there was no other thing. And granted, that path wasn't like a perfectly straightforward trajectory, but that was what I always wanted to do. It was never a question in my mind that I wanted to do that. Sometimes there was thoughts of like maybe I should have a backup plan, but why have backup plans? Just do it.
Yeah, figure it out when you go.
Figure it out as you go. Roll with it.
Good tech startup mindset too. No, now I know you like cats, you like dogs, you also love horses. So when you were first going into vet school, thinking about what career would look like for you, what did you think about, and did that change over time?
Yeah, so here's fun. Not all wonder or loss, like I've mentioned, is kind of like my recurring theme of my life. I was gonna do poultry medicine.
Wow.
I wanted to do production medicine. I grew up in 4-H and had a lot of experience with a ton of different species, but the production aspect of it really kind of stuck out to me. And I thought that that would be what I wanted to do. And so I spent some time with some poultry producers and veterinarians and came to realize that I would probably actually have to move to North Carolina in order to do that. And so that actually became kind of the reason why I did not choose that particular career path after I graduated vet school, was because I would have to move most likely to the South or to the Midwest. And I really, really wanted to stay in the Northwest. That was really important to me. And so it was really great to with Dr. Corselia from Foster Farms was like, you know what, just go be a practitioner, go do whatever. Like you can always change. Like you aren't stuck picking. You don't have to like get out of school the day you graduate, and that's what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And so that little bit of advice stuck with me throughout my career, actually. So surprisingly, I was like, you know what, that's great, because I didn't feel like I was ever letting down a dream, or or failing to do something once you framed it that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a big part of the podcast too, is, all the different things that are out there that you can do. And as you grow or change or you have new interests, there's so many different things that you can kind of move into. So you decided against poultry medicine. So what did you start out in right after vet school?
So equine medicine. I got the keys to my ambulatory vet rig and rolled and loved it. Absolutely loved it. I've had horses, growing up. Never was a serious like horse show kid. Now I'm becoming a show mom to my 13-year-old, and it's a totally new world to me. But I loved the challenge that working with horses provided, and so I was like, that's what I'm going to do. So I spent some time in my senior year preceptorship with a bunch of different local practitioners, and I had quite a few job offers when I left school, and picked one that seemed like it would be fun. And I did have fun. We all leave our first jobs for a multitude of reasons, and but it was a really good time. The James Harriet-esque lifestyle of that was really fun. I mean, and there's stories abound from that particular thing, which is probably beside the point of today's episode. But anytime I think about it, I'm like, if I was good at writing, I should write a book about some of these things because some of these you just can't make the stuff up.
Well, I am interested. Is there one story that pops into your mind from that?
Oh yeah, in the breeding shed, the time one of my clients got bred.
Oh, oh my.
Yeah, yeah.
That's memorable.
Yeah, yeah. So to keep it really short, because it's a pretty long story, I had a client and she had a quite wealthy husband who decided that he was tired of paying very large vet bills. And he figured that he could help his wife collect. She'd taken the Colorado course and knew what she was doing and was pretty handy. And they had, oh gosh, probably 4 or 5 stallions on the farm. And so they thought that this would be a profitable endeavor for them to learn together and it was something they could do. He was an engineer type. And so they had me come up to, just help kind of teach him and guide him and go through the process with him. And obviously she knew what she was doing as well too, I thought. And she was a mumbler and she mumbled something and I didn't pick up exactly what she had said. And so I was like, okay. So I was standing there with him, kind of going over the process, and I hear this terrible squealing out in the barn. And I'm like, ooh, geez, the stud that I thought she was grabbing, he's a pretty polite citizen. And, it would be great to teach her husband with. She comes in and she's got this stud that I've actually never seen before. I don't even know who he is. And she's like, oh, I figure we would use him today. And I'm like, the second that he walked into the breeding shed, his activity was off. I mean, there was a mare in heat in the stanchions, and he is directing all of his studly prowess to the lady who's handling him. And I'm like, this is not good. I mean, and in those slow motion movies where you're like, no. So he starts rearing up at her, and that's about the time what she'd mumbled clicked in my head. And she says, oh, I have some in heat mare urine. And I realized she had a rag of mare urine in her hand.
Oh no.
And that's where stuff started going downhill really quickly because this was a very young stallion. He had never been collected before. I don't know why she had grabbed him. And so he started rearing up and, like I said, was directing all of his attention towards her. And she got nervous and she turned around and she hit her head. And at about that point, he mounted her. And I'll save some of the details, but she landed on the ground when certain parts hit her. And then he was like, well, where did, and so he started pawing at her. And I mean, it was really serious at that point, obviously, because stallions can kill people. And like I said, it was her poor husband. I just remember his face. He's clutching the AV on the barn wall, just like, oh. And I'm like, shoot, I'm the professional. I have to fix this.
Oh, that's my job.
Oh, I am here as a professional capacity. Anyways, I grabbed that stud and I was like, get him out of the barn. So all is well. She ended up with a couple of broken ribs and some pretty bruised ego, but yeah, like I said, you just can't make this stuff up. I mean,
So
someday.
I'm guessing they changed their mind maybe on.
Yes, you know what? The husband had zero problems paying any of his vet bills after that. And I mean, not that he was a bad pay. He just was like, no, seriously, like what you guys do is legit. I want no part in this. So, and maybe that was his wife's point, is that she grabbed the challenging one. I don't think she intended it to end up like that, but no, she's fine.
Well, I'm glad
Made a good
everyone.
story.
Yes. Oh goodness. Well, while I seriously doubt that was the one that encouraged you to change your career path for what you're comfortable with, what kind of led you to the next step of your career?
You know, there was a lot of little things, and I think, it's like it's really challenging to be a private practitioner and run your own business and make it profitable. And, there were just some interpersonal things in between me and the veterinarian I worked for. I mean, and I think we all kind of come out of vet school with that, like, you think it's going to be this and it doesn't exactly work out. And, there was time for a change. I, at that point, had a very large non-compete and in equine practice, and I'd bought a house and was settled into the area I wanted to be in. And so I actually went over to one of my colleagues over at Banfield and I was like, you guys want an equine doctor who, need to change, to get out of her non-compete. And that was, of course, in 2008 too, when the whole market was kind of not doing so great for equine. And, it was a good time to step away from that particular space for that time. And so, and their Banfield was like, yeah, we love you. Equine retreads, as somebody coined it. You guys are brave, obviously. You're not scared of terribly much, and you're really hard workers, because a 40-hour work week for you guys is like
Nothing.
vacation time.
Wow.
I know, they gave me an offer and I was like, you guys are going to pay me what to work that little? This is fantastic. But as far as a step in my career, it was really, it was a fun step. I mean, I had a really amazing boss who I think it's one of those places where, it makes a big difference of where you go. Dr. Kathy Engler, shout out to her, just was one of those people that made spaces for you to grow and learn and develop, and was just so passionate about it, and to enable you to just be the best, that you could be. I definitely owe her some credit for helping me kind of like switch paths in my career. And it was also a great space too, because, wasn't terribly long after there, I had my daughter, which, it was a much safer space to have be pregnant in, to be honest, and to be
Yeah.
able to have a little bit more flexible work life when I came back. And I actually really enjoyed small animal practice, because in equine, there's so much you just can't tell. I mean, there's like that, that thorax and that abdomen that, you just can't image through it. Like, even you can't just throw them on the x-ray machine and see what's going on in there. I mean, it's just, you're taking some very educated guesses sometimes, and it can be a bit challenging. And so I really loved being able to be a much more, I guess, I'm not sure the right word, just it's not accurate, but just to be, you get your questions answered by being a diagnostician, instead of being like, I think we answered it because they got better, and we just are never going to know unless they either had to surgery or necropsy, and that's hopefully you don't have to go there. But yeah, so I really enjoyed that. But I am wandering, and I quickly got kind of like, okay, this is, wasn't really where I had expected to be. And then I had an opportunity to open one of the standalone Banfields, which was really, really fun. It was the first of the standalone projects that we opened up, and the particular interview for that job, they're like, you want to be a show pony? Because it's going to be all the Mars family and all the big wigs coming through here. And I was like, bring it. That was a really fun endeavor. I really enjoyed that team and working with them, and being able to see that side of hospital building, but yet with the support of a big backing and not my own money, which seemed like a little bit daunting at the time. So maybe I'll add that to my list someday. I don't know, to do again.
That's really interesting because building a practice, there's so much that you have to go through for everything from the business side of things. And yes, you had a place where the financials were coming in, but to the construction process.
Yeah, so I mean, really, it was pretty interesting because it was such a new process for them. We were afforded a bit of a leeway in kind of like, how do you want to run this? And the practice manager and I, we sat down and we're like, this particular area, we need to be like this. These people shop here, and this is the sort of practice that we want to be. And we were afforded that luxury, and we did very well. It was a very, very fun place to work, very great clientele, and and fostering those relationships. I love that, practicing relationships with the humans. I'm a rare veterinary extrovert, so that part just like builds me up and fills me up. So I know it's not necessarily the same for everyone, but after a couple of years there, I had just gotten bored again. There's only so many ear infections you can see, or surgical cases, or that you're like, what's over the hill. And I've always been fascinated with technology. I'd made some comments to some leadership and said, hey, I'm kind of interested in, doing something different. I'm not sure what the next path is, but, just putting my feelers out there. And I get a call from somebody one Saturday and was like, hey, we've got this project showing up. You want to go work on the IT team? And I'm like, okay. Saying yes to just crazy things, like, just not being afraid to change. That was the biggest piece for me throughout like my career, is just, like, okay, it's time to move on, time to change, it's time to do something different. The grass, it's not that the grass is greener, it's just that, I like new things and wandered on. And that was a really great spot because it really opened my eyes to what technology could do to solve some of the problems that, general practitioners face. And that's where I really got inspired of like, okay, wow, because that was 2014, some of the new technologies were just really started, AI was really starting to kind of like get some traction in places. And, the Watson had come out and I was like, oh, these are some things that you could, we could potentially do some cool things with these things. And of course, these things take time. So obviously it's been a while, but
Do you mind elaborating just a little bit on the Watson? Do you mind kind of bringing us along that journey?
yeah. So Watson was, I think IBM, gosh, this is getting to be a few years ago now. They built this computer to play Jeopardy and I believe win it, but really was this opportunity to show how a computer could ingest large volumes of data and when questioned could bring up relevant pieces that would be right to answer a question for something like Jeopardy. And there was people trying to do that for medical textbooks and even in the veterinary space. And, just like, what could we do with this, technology to help, but at that point it was still kind of in that not exactly good enough. And so, I mean, technologies have this curve and it's like good enough kind of is like the spot where you get traction. And then, it kind of develops from there. If it's not easier to do it that way, it's not going to happen. It's not going to be implemented. I mean, that's one of the things I think about a lot in my particular career where I'm at now is, just how do we implement these things in veterinary practices? Because having a really grounded background as a practitioner and understanding, what the day to day is keeps me my true north of like, how do you make sure that these things make sense? How are they easy to use? How are they applicable? How are they good enough, better than what you had, but a really positive step forward?
I think that's a good point too, because especially veterinary medicine, we're not usually the fastest adopters of of change. So being able to know when is that stage of, okay, now we're finally to a point where, yes, it makes life a little easier. It's not completely out of the atmosphere with cost and all of those things and trying to implement them to solve problems in the space. Like that to me that starts to be kind of a lot to think about when you're implementing this.
Yeah, and there's no magic in it. I think, everybody's like, "What's the secret?" sort of thing. I mean, and it's a lot of trial and error. I mean, it's a lot of like figuring out. And I think for me, I just trying to solve big problems, trying to make them easier than what the solutions you had before. And one of the pieces that I really take home is that, that how can technology like guide your care, make it easier, but not take that human compassion and emotion away from it to bring that joy to providing we're healers. That's what we do. That's why most of us are in this profession. Like how do you help you heal in a way that makes sense, but yet, maybe makes your life a little easier in the process?
Yeah. So what has been your role throughout this evolution of technology?
Yeah, so I have managed to carve myself, I think it's kind of a little bit of a niche. I don't even know what to call myself some days. Translator is kind of where I've settled in some ways because a lot of I've taken many iterations for tech teams since moving to the IT team at Banfield, and when we were on that particular project, we worked on improving Petware, which was the EMR for all of Banfield hospitals, and that gave me a really good grounding of like kind of what data was out there and how you could think about that data. And one of the things about that is that the data is only as good as its source. And so in that process of it was also thinking about what was the condition this data was entered in, where was that thought pattern of that practitioner as they were putting it in, were they frustrated because they couldn't find the right diagnostic code, because there's structured data and unstructured data. And the unstructured data is what most veterinarians are probably more familiar with. It's little chart notes, like P presents blah 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 owner. I mean, it's just through your little shorthand that you kind of make this little notes about what's happening with the case and the follow up. But one of the things that was really progressive about Banfield in the years back is they spent a lot of time trying to make their data structured. And when you have structured data, it becomes a lot more queryable and a lot easier to, put into buckets and do things with. Granted, that's changing actually really rapidly in today's world and now, but I'll head into that in a little bit. I was thinking about, hey, when we went through that project, like how do we make it so these practitioners can enter in the most accurate diagnostic code, or, can they find the right one that they want in the right time? What does it mean? How do we capture the pertinent pieces of the exam in a better way, in a more accurate way? And that was a really interesting exercise to kind of lay the groundwork for some of the next phases in my career. And from there, I had a really amazing opportunity to kind of think about what the future of pet care could look like with Mars Veterinary Health. We had done a kind of a forward thinking project of like, what does the future look like? What do we want to like do as a business? And had a really amazing opportunity to present some of those findings to pet care leadership and say, hey, here's kind of what some of the best people in not our industry, but all of the industries are doing to really think proactively about the future. And one of those was have a place where innovation can go and thrive, because innovation inside of a big organism, there's lots of people who have studied this and talked about it, that there's kind of an immune response, if it's not making money or if it's not hitting these ROIs or things like that. And the innovative process to make new things requires space and time and the ability to iterate and the ability to change things and the ability to crumple up, stuff and throw it in the trash when it doesn't work, or, pull it back out of the trash and smooth it out and be like, wrong place, wrong time over here. And so that led to a position with Practice of the Future, where we got to think about like, what does it look like to integrate, telehealth into a veterinary practice, and what does it look like to try out, some of these new unique technologies, and how do we get veterinary practitioners to think about these new technologies and how should they use them, and what sort of that change adoption curve look like. And we spent a lot of time doing just little tests and learns in that particular role, and it was really really a fun, enjoyable time. And looking back on it, it's fun because a lot of those things are, now out and operationalized, and, just ways that hopefully made people's lives a little bit easier. Just, growing from a crazy idea that people were like, oh, that'll never work, to you're like, no, I think it can. I think it just might work, we might be able to do it. But one of the things that you don't think about in that is you spend a lot of time digging through the regulatory environment of like, okay, so where's the line? Like, okay, here's a gray area. And then making also really intentional choices of like, where does it make sense to push the line? Where does it make sense to like stay the line? And where does it make sense to just burn it all down and try and start over? But, really trying to keep those values of like, what's best for the pet, what's best for the profession as a guiding light to when you're making some of those, like, where do we push? Where do we don't push? This maybe is dangerous. We shouldn't do it.
Was there a surprising, because you mentioned that you brought in industries outside of the veterinary industry to kind of demonstrate what it looked like to look for towards the future. Was there one in particular that either surprised you or was just like a really unique perspective that ended up being valuable in our profession?
Living in the innovation space, we visited Pixar, and Pixar is obviously well known for having like tons of just blockbuster movies.
Yeah.
And there was just one line that they had in there that was just stuck home, and that was they never finish movies, they release them.
Huh.
Which is, kind of, it's, you're like, okay, well, you release it, you're done with it. No, you're not done with it. There's never a concept of done. And that was a powerful sort of take home message. And I think about that a lot as we're building new technologies. It's like there's a point at which you're just like, good enough. Let's take it out.
Let's try it.
Let's
Yeah.
let's try this. We've thought about it. It makes sense. It works, because otherwise you can kind of get stuck in that paralysis of like, okay, never gonna finish. Like, where is it perfect? We're a bit of perfectionists as a profession to begin with, and so like, oh my gosh, what about all these edge cases? And it's not gonna do this, and it's not gonna do that. But you're like, no, we're gonna release it, and you know what? It could still be a blockbuster. Well, maybe not, but maybe. So just being brave. We'll learn.
Yeah. Well, I think honestly, it even kind of ties back into your career, right? It's okay, just try something new because you're a person that likes change and you like trying new things. And so you may not have the full vision of the path or really know at all what being a veterinarian on an IT team is it's going to be like, but you tried it and you must have kind of liked it because you're still doing a lot with technology now. You're about to celebrate 10 years, if I got that date right, 2014. So
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Yeah, I am. I was looking at my best friend the other day and I was like, when did we become like the older, more experienced people? I mean, we graduated 17 years ago and you're like starting to really realize that time is flying. And I mean, I guess a small segue, but I realized also that as much as time is flying, I have a lot of time left to do things. And that really excites me, which I guess is a good thing. So, the world's our oyster. I can just keep playing. So yeah, I mean, I loved it. And the thing I think about technology that really keeps me engaged is there's so much change just intrinsic to the process that, about the time you kind of sit back on your laurels and be like, yeah, we've got this sorted out. Like you've got a whole new toolkit of things that you could apply to new problems. Or like I was saying, sometimes you like pull something out and you're like, wrong place, wrong time. Like, hey, there's a new technology that's going to make this work where before it wouldn't work, or that the profession wasn't ready for it, or a multitude of reasons why it wasn't successful. And so as I was mentioning to you when we started, we've kind of gone through like as a company that so many different shifts, and it's it for somebody who's change agile, it even was a little bit perhaps much, but it was a really great opportunity to just be like, in order to figure this out, we're just going to have to just keep like trying new things. And so, I mean, I've generally worked on the very similar sorts of projects throughout, but they've just been in different functions, business functions throughout. And I'm very, really excited where we're at now, being part of the new division, science and diagnostics, and being on the innovation team. It kind of feels like just right, you know. This is where we can get a lot of really cool things that we've been working on to take off. Hopefully, I mean, a lot of them have taken off. It's just lots more ideas. I have never-ending pile of ideas that I would love to just keep doing. But I think as far as like where I've been working the last 5 years has that's been just really exciting is I had an opportunity to work on a new project called the Pet Insight Project. And it started off as what can we do with this 3-axial accelerometer, this little whistle device, and a bunch of medical data, and can we create something meaningful out of this beyond just being able to say like, here's how far your dog walked or how much activity they had a day. So we had a lot of freedom in that particular team just to kind of dive in and think about like how we wanted to use this device to understand dog behaviors. And it has been a very satisfying thing. We've been able to teach the device through machine learning and deep neural networks, and which is essentially kind of like there's lots of different sorts of ways that you can use the computers to help manipulate data. And really at the end of the day, it's just we're taking massive, massive, massive sets of data that it would just take a human forever and ever to do anything with. And we're asking advanced computing to do something with this for us. And as far as like the veterinary profession, like I don't know, it's kind of like this black box of learning and everything else. I'm like, so is your brain. I mean, your brain's the original neural network. I mean, it's what these things are kind of modeled after. I mean, like all the neurons, like we know about these things. Like as a profession, this should not be something that is like totally left field for us. You can't see which synapse talk to this synapse, to talk to that one, to talk to that one, to figure out exactly why you had the answer that you had to a question or why you came up with it. But we can test it. And just like, you learn something and you can take a test, you can understand if, your answer was correct or not. And so we do that with the computers, and we can teach them things and we can test them. And then, when they're good enough, because you don't have to get 100% on every single test, But I think sometimes people think that with the technology, it needs to be 100%, and nothing in life is. It's just like any other test. There's sensitivity, specificity. A lot of the stuff that we learned about in veterinary medicine, applies to, using these new predictive technologies and applying them. Very interesting, though, the computer side of things all speak in very different languages around how to like validate particular things that the computer's doing. And so when I showed up on this team, I was like, if we're going to talk to veterinarians about these things, we probably need to speak in a language that makes sense for somebody with a, more of a biological sciences background rather than a machine learning background, because an F1 score doesn't mean anything to a veterinary practitioner. I can guarantee you. And I'm like, here, hey, you want to explain F1 scores to me? You're like, I have no idea. But when I say sensitivity, specificity, accuracy, positive predictive values, even if you're not like in the forefront of thinking about statistics and thinking about that and epidemiology or, public health, you remember that from vet school. Way back, there was a class that those things meant something for doing testing. And you can go like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. So one of the things, there's just the good enough piece, but one of the things that we've really been taking this to the next level, and I've been really working hard on, is like, how do you kind of start to get like the peer-reviewed literature behind what we've been doing? And so really writing, publishing, talking about it, interrupted all by COVID, of course, to some degree, but really trying to get people the technology in front of the practitioners in a way that makes sense to them through some of the traditional channels, and have kind of that stamp of peer-reviewed approval on it, that it's like, hey, other people have torn this apart and looked at it. And it's a really emerging space. I mean, there's actually a lot of young computer scientists who, I always joke I'm gonna get a little bit burned at the stake of veterinary medicine by saying something like this, but there's a lot of our jobs that can be replaced by technology. And, that sounds really scary to people. And I think, the emergence of Chat GPT and stuff like that that's come out, and people realizing like, oh my gosh, like Chat GPT, like you can ask it a question and it's pretty darn good at answering it. It's kind of like Watson, 10 years later, right? It's been trained on a much bigger data set. It has much, much more real language skills than before. And it's really pretty good. I mean, yeah, it makes some mistakes, so it still needs some oversight by a trained practitioner, but it can do a lot of cool things for you, which is pretty great. I mean, it does not replace you, but can think of it as like, how can it augment you? How can it make your life better? Like, how can we apply some of these things and put the joy back into practice, instead of like just have it be full of the mundane, exhausting tasks? Like what can be delegated to some of these technology pieces? And one of the pieces that I work in a lot of is that, we trained these little whistle devices that, have their little 3-axial accelerometer, which is a very, very simple bit of technology that's very inexpensive to use, which is great because when you want to like get something out to the masses, it needs to be approachable. I mean, if it was $1,000, it would not ever probably make it. But for $100 or around that price point, you can reach a pretty good market. And we've gotten the technology to the point now that it is really, really quite good at eating detection, surprisingly great, I mean, in like licking and scratching, our dermatology use cases. I mean, I remember as a practitioner, like, you're like, hey, how much is your dog, itching? And people would be like, I don't know. I think maybe not that bad. And you're looking at the skin and it's excoriated and the hair is broken off. And how much are they licking? Maybe a little bit, and you're like, the paw staining. I mean, the lick staining on your poor dog's, flank. And one of the ways that this also does is the technology takes that expertise that was limited to like the exam room and really small tidbits of, information, and it can put it in front of a pet parent in a much more ubiquitous fashion. And so they have access to like understanding what my pet's doing. And there's a lot of other ways that we can do this as well. I mean, we're just really kind of cracking the surface of what this looks like. And in some ways it's kind of scary, like I'm often going to be found joking, in the post-apocalyptic society that I'll be just farming with my horses. But, so doing things with ethics. And, like I was saying earlier, with that value for the practitioner, value for the pet parent, like, how do we make these things of service to them and really help the pet parents understand what their pet needs and live a better life. And one of the researches that I've been doing lately is kind of like we've been understanding like what a normal level of scratching looks like for a dog, for example, like being able to take these huge data sets and be like, what is normal for things that we never were able to put a normal to before. And now you can say, hey, this is not normal to a pet parent. And they're like, oh my gosh. And instead of that veterinarian in that 15-minute exam time going like, this isn't normal. And the pet parent's like, yeah, it's fine. And you're like, no, it's not. But hopefully these little nudges can make the practitioner's life a little bit easier.
Yeah, not only is it because you showed me some of the videos that you have as well that you've given in presentations before as well, the fact that not only have you gotten to the point where we can now detect an increase in itching, so you're helping with the diagnostics, you're helping with the communication piece to the owner. And then what I find very helpful, being a specialist as well, I mean, I want to treat the issue too. So now you can measure before and after treatment to see if your treatment is actually doing anything or not.
Yep.
So there's a lot of levels of help with the practitioner with this particular research and the technology that you've done. So I find it super exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely something that I am so excited about it. Like, I just want to be screaming from the rooftops. Like, I don't know why this is like not being like advertised, like some of these new ways of doing things. You're like, hey, this is really easy, especially for dermatitis. Like, how many horrid dermatitis cases do you have to like beat your head against the wall? And this is the way like these tools can be like, hey, pet parents, look, get your dog in for its next Cytopoint injection, or something, look, the scratching's going up. I mean, one of my new puppies has skin allergies and you think living with a veterinarian that they should be like, "Psh, whatever. This is still, as a pet parent, all of a sudden it changes the game. This is a pain in the butt,
Yep.
And I mean, I'm sitting there like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm like, this is a great tool. Like, hey, look, hey, I changed his food, and instead of having to think about like, oh, I'm going to take this, yeah, it changes a little quicker than you thought because we're not looking at these like really gross amounts of change. We're able to see much more subtle change and understand that what we're doing is actually heading in the right direction. And you're able to see those bad trends start a little bit quicker, the better trends, and it's a little bit more fine-tuned than what we had before to do it. And so one of the things that I think about often is as we get the ability to have so much more measuring of your pet and data about them, is like, what's too much? Where do you start to get intrusive into why do we have a pet? Why do we love animals? It's because they make our lives better. And like, how do you keep it from being like just, oh my gosh, there's something wrong, or this is, terrible, you should do something. And that's a fine balance. And one of the other pieces, and I actually was talking to one of my physicians about this the other day, because obviously human medicine is dealing with this as well, is just because we can predict something or we can detect something early, we may not actually have anything we know to do for it at that particular phase, which I think is a really frustrating part as we think about rolling out some of these new technologies to practitioners, is they need to be able to do something with this information because otherwise it's just scary. You're able to predict this pet's going to get this horrendous disease, down the road, and there's like no intervention point. The human genetic space and even perhaps the animal genetic space has dealt with this. Like if you're able to say like this is a risk factor for your pet, then what? Do you just live in fear one day of that you're going to get breast cancer or something like that? Or yeah, I don't think we have the answers to that yet, which is one, fascinating because there's probably answers out there, but two, what's the right thing to do in those situations? And I don't think anybody has the exact answer for that, but it is an interesting question to think about as we do some things. How do we make lives better instead of more complicated? And just because you can, should you? And some of that's a personal decision. It's not that these things come completely uncomplicated as we roll them out.
Exactly. And that has definitely come up in my work as well. I think renal tech was a situation that I remember when it came out, and we were so excited that we have these early and earlier detections of potential kidney disease and using algorithms. And it's kind of fun at first when you're looking forward to new things, but then at the time, it's like, okay, well, if this is positive, if it is trending towards this, what do I do with the information? And I mean, there's some things you could do. Maybe it might change your medication recommendation if there are comorbidity. So there may be some things that it's valuable, but then yeah, as technology is almost a little advanced of us, right? We don't always know. But I think that also comes back to this is why there will always need to be a human element when it comes to this. Like we're never going to lose our jobs because we still need a human being there to be with the pet parent to help figure out for this individual situation, for this pet, for this family, what do we need to do? Maybe it is nothing. And it's
Yeah.
just the knowledge that, all right, my veterinarian knows. And so when we come back next year, we'll keep it in mind. If we need to change things, we can.
One thing that I feel really passionate about is that the technology, as good as we can get it, it doesn't have the same perspective as the human could have. There's a lot of context of the environment that just never can be fully, I think, quantified. That really, that emotional piece, like I say, what is the right thing? Is it better to know? Is it better not to know in some of these situations? And that's very personal. And so, and I don't I mean, people say like maybe with the singularity, the computers will be able to know all those things. That's part where I'm farming with my horses. But but they've made enough movies about all those things that I think
I
we
was
know
gonna
how that
say,
ends up.
I'm thinking the movie I, Robot, which I really like this movie with Will Smith. And the very beginning, he does not like robots. And you find out why is because there was a car crash with him and his daughter. And they go over the bridge, and a robot comes to the scene to rescue. And it does its calculation on risk, who is, I can only save one person, who is the
Yeah,
most likely to survive. It calculated to save the dad and not the daughter. And so the daughter dies in the accident. So his point is there, computers can calculate and they can
yeah,
do all these amazing things, but there will still always need to be that human element who can assess the situation on a much more dimensional level when it comes to human beings because we're complex and
yeah.
we're not always an equation. My goodness, I think anybody who should know, people don't follow rule books, so we're always going to need a human element to make sure that we're doing the best thing in a situation.
Yeah, and I think that often gets lost in some of these conversations of like, you could do this, you could do that, you could do this. I'm like, yeah, but how do we use technology to make our lives better and solve some of these hard problems, but not have it be to the point where you just hand it all over? That is, so the wrong answer. And you lose that compassion, that empathy, all the things that make us distinctly human that really are why we're happy. And I think, and take away some of the things that are like the rote mundane tasks that like make us all crazy and busy and chaotic. And maybe, we'll be able to make our lives just a little bit more. I don't know, everybody's like work-life balance. Like, I don't know if that really exists, in my mind, I love to be busy, but take away the things that bring you less joy and do more of the things that make you more joy. And so you may still be busy, but you can fill your busyness or maybe not busyness. Like I guess there are people who do like to relax on these weird sort of like couch like things or, chairs.
Yeah, well, you can choose your busy. I think,
Yeah.
I've used the phrase choose your hard. What's the work that you enjoy doing that fulfills your why and like you said, your joy? Because I think we are a profession full of we like to have a mission and a purpose and we like to feel like we're working and giving back in some form or fashion. So it's just finally being able to say, this is that definition for me, and I can focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Can chat GPT write some of your medical notes? I don't know. I think we'll be seeing some of those things like, in the near future. I don't know anybody who's doing it, but it's obviously this has just been a recent development and I'm quite a fan of using it to like, oh, my growing up, I excelled in math and science and the writing and all those stuff was just terrible. And my mom was like, "You're gonna need these some days." Thanks, mom. No, I don't. Actually, I literally don't. I don't have to spell anything. I don't have to write anything anymore. Like
Thank goodness for the spell correct and word and
Grammarly,
Grammarly. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Yep.
my daughter, when she's learning to spell it, I'm like, Alexa, how do you spell this? And
Yeah.
like, it's I literally cannot spell. It's so embarrassing. But at the same point, you're like, I don't have to anymore. And I think of, the way that we can apply some of those technologies that are just ubiquitous to us these days to some of the tough areas of veterinary medicine and understanding pets. And I think, every veterinarian wants pet parents to understand their pets better at just the right level. And I think, because years ago when every pet parent was Dr. Googling, and we're like, oh my gosh, you're Dr. Googling. And you're like, educated pet parents are a good thing. I mean, granted, they weren't getting like the best education that they could have then, but, we have some new tools these days to help us improve that. And, some of these remote things of like, hey, your dog's actually scratching this much, for example, instead of, just contextualizing the information for the pet parent in a little better, more precise way. And telemedicine, I certainly, kind of handled a lot of that. Like, how do you provide this care? Like, what's the right place? I've certainly spent a bunch of time as well running a telemedicine team and enjoy that part. But I just pick one area to focus on, and I'm heading down this particular road. It's like how do you provide that care outside of the clinic, and not just have it be care outside of the clinic, but really just kind of a lifestyle of health. And nobody's quite figured out how health pays. Sick pays in today's society, but we're still trying to sort out like how do you keep things healthier. Ideally, as a practitioner, you went into this because you love animals, and fixing them is fun and exciting, but it's so much more fulfilling, I think, just to see them healthy and catch those things early.
Exactly. I think we're on the cusp of that. It's definitely coming into human medicine for sure. I think we've got a little bit more time before we're hot and heavy with the preventative. There's some. I mean, I like to think nutrition. We try, right?
Yeah.
We're trying on the front end as well. But to me, that is very exciting. I think it's a little bit harder to sell sometimes from a psychology perspective, but we'll learn that along with it, I think.
Yeah. I mean, how do you sell that something didn't happen?
Yep. I talk to people about this too. Yeah,
Y-
it's really interesting.
We prevented that from happening. And then you either like are in scare tactic land, or you're like, hypothetical land. And how do you know that that didn't happen because of what you did? And we obviously can have data to back it up. The stories of one, though, will get a little bit harder because you're like, well, I didn't get it. Was I going to get it? I mean, I probably was going to get it, but I didn't get it, because I did this. I don't know. Like, I don't have a great answer for that one.
Yeah.
I
But
think
we'll learn.
humans, yeah,
Yeah.
we're very much more transactional of like, I I got this, it's all good, but the future, that's the cool thing, is that there's like just so many cool questions and so many cool things that we can do, and just so many other fun things. And I guess someday my next step would be to do more with horses, like in a professional career. I think, I mean, I keep telling everybody the Mars does do some equine work.
Yep.
I'm just like, okay, can we work on some horse stuff? Like, I want to work on some horse stuff. I mean, I have never let the equine practitioner fade. I've still actually, I mean, I have 15 of my own horses. So, and still will work on some friends and family in my spare time, because spare time is meant to be filled up.
I think that speaks very much to you. We have run out of time, but I want to sneak one last question in because I think this is one of the most important questions that we can ask ourselves at the end of the day. And what is something that you are most grateful for?
Oh, you know what? That's a hard one, but yet I was thinking about this the other day, and seeing so many of my colleagues feeling stuck in their career, and you're like, just it's not working the way they wanted to, or it's not envisioning. But I'm actually most grateful for that piece of paper that I got for my degree. What if I went to back and be a veterinarian again? Would I do it? Absolutely, because the opportunities are so boundless. And sometimes it doesn't seem like they exist, but I mean, I've gotten every place in my career by just saying yes to crazy things. Like, this is outlandish. Like, do you want to like do it? I'm like, we don't even know what it is, but do you want to join us? And like, saying yes. And so I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity to become a veterinarian in the days of people questioning of whether or not they wanted to be a veterinarian or not. I think it makes me sad because there's so much that we can offer the world and helping people with their animals that it doesn't. I mean, we need the practitioner taking care of the sick stuff, and I still do that myself. I find great joy in that, and I feel like there's not enough equine practitioners, so I still do my dues fairly regular basis actually to treat those, and it keeps me really grounded in what medicine needs and what is the real situations facing the practitioners out there. And I also feel really privileged that I have found a space in my career where it's really fulfilling mentally, and I can still treat a horse, and then I can think about the crazy next iteration of technology that potentially could make practitioners' life better. But my favorite part is just being actually helping a pet parent or a horse owner like figure out like how to make things better and how to help their animal live its best life. That bond is so powerful and strong. That's what makes me go.
This has been the Vet Life Reimagined podcast. Whether you are listening or watching on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please make sure you are subscribed to catch all these amazing people in our profession. Also, send this episode to someone you think who would appreciate it. Have a recommendation for someone who would be a good guest? Please reach out on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. There aren't that many Dr. Sprinkles. Until next time, Vet Lifers.